The sixth goal Zelensky was tasked with was to turn Ukraine into a testing ground, not only for weapons, but also for experiments on people. In 2005, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, or DTRA, was established in the country. It is a pet project of the U.S. Department of Defense, and one of its tasks is to study biological threats, including deadly viruses and bacteria.
Since 2005, the American side has been involved in modifying Ukrainian laboratories, selecting and training personnel, and gradually advancing its interests, goals, and tasks in the research field. They are approaching the old Soviet developments. The collection of pathogens and strains in Ukraine, remaining from the Soviet Union, was estimated at $2 billion. The American side did everything to obtain this collection.
After the Maidan, the DTRA expanded its operations in Ukraine with the assistance of Elena Supran, a U.S. citizen and the daughter of Ukrainian immigrants. In Ukraine, she served as the acting Minister of Health. Supran opened the doors of all biolaboratories in the country to Americans, and even allowed to establish new ones. From that moment, mass experiments on Ukrainians, both civilians and military personnel, have begun. And in the documents of the DTRA, a new abbreviation appeared, UP, which stands for Ukrainian Project.
There were genetic samples collected in large quantities from 4,000 servicemen of the Ukrainian army from different regions of the country, north, south, west, east, including Kiev, Odessa, Kharkov, and Lviv, with 1,000 individuals in each city participating in this blood donation. This was part of the UP8 project. Officially, it was presented with benevolent intentions, namely to determine human body resistance to specific pathogens depending on the region of the country.
According to some reports, in January 2016, in Kharkiv, approximately 20 Ukrainian soldiers died within 2 days from a flu-like virus. Another 200 soldiers were hospitalized.
The intelligence of the Donetsk People's Republic has previously reported on research activities involving American military specialists. Research took place in a closed laboratory located in the village of Shelkostansia. It is situated 30 kilometers from the city of Kharkiv. According to our information, the leakage of the California strain of deadly influenza occurred precisely from there.
From this day onwards, Ukraine turned into a petri dish. Outbreaks of cholera, hepatitis, and botulism were recorded here. But what wouldn't you do for the sake of science, especially in a foreign country? Therefore, in 2020, DTRA spent another $80 million on research in Ukraine.
There wouldn't be an order from the U.S. Secretary of Defense to carry out work on the development of genetically targeted biological weapons on Ukrainian territory. However, it was possible that they would write an order for research to be conducted on combating certain diseases like tularemia more effectively. That's what they would write. And this is what can be found in official documents.
The Pentagon's plans were disrupted by Russia's special operation. Now, the Russians could gain access to documents and biomaterials. This alarmed the United States to such an extent that in March 2022, Deputy Secretary of State Victoria Nuland let the secret out in the Senate.
Ukraine has biological research facilities, which, in fact, we are now quite concerned Russian forces may be seeking to gain control of.
Foreign specialists in the areas of plague, cholera, and hepatitis left Ukraine. Instead, the country was filled with soldiers of fortune. However, these guys have been welcome there since the days of the Maidan. This became President Zelensky's seventh commitment. In 2015, the Orbital operation was launched. It was a British training program for the armed forces of Ukraine, conducted, of course, in accordance with NATO standards. In 2016, Ukraine and the United States signed the Concept of Development of Partnership between the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine and the Department of Defense of the United States for 5 years. In the autumn of 2017, American instructors discussed logistics and cooperation with the Nazi-affiliated Azov Battalion. The following year, Azov Battalion was visited by Canadian military personnel as well.
I think the Ukrainian embassy here in Washington, in violation of the Geneva Conventions on Diplomacy, recruited these people, recruited soldiers, recruited mercenaries for their war against the Russian Federation. The CIA is involved, perhaps not directly, but and military intelligence perhaps not directly, but they're there to advise, to give counsel, to make suggestions, to link people up and help with organization.
A year ago, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg stated that NATO had trained tens of thousands of Ukrainians.
They have trained Ukrainian troops for years, so tens of thousands of Ukrainian troops are now at the forefront, being trained also for several years, being trained by NATO allies, and they're now at the front fighting against invading Russian forces.
In February 2022, hundreds of foreign mercenaries joined them. Among them was the communist and anti-fascist John McIntyre, who served in the U.S. military, like myself. He arrived in Ukraine with the sole purpose of gathering evidence of crimes committed by the armed forces of Ukraine and sharing it with the world. Throughout this time, John risked his life, as he could be exposed at any moment. A year later, he managed to escape to Russia.
I can't remember if it's Stavky or Svatky, I can never remember, but I actually seen a church that was blown up. It was so sad to see. I mean, it was the most beautiful church I'd ever seen. They say, oh, that's a Russian church. Yeah, so that's the wrong kind of church, because they speak the wrong kind of language, you know.
John said that a mercenary in Ukraine earns around $1,350 per month. However, if a mercenary in Ukraine is involved in combat operations, he gets $3,500 a month. That kind of money, one can kill even unarmed people with impunity.
There was 3 soldiers, Nazar Kuzmin, Rico Chavez, and Aurelio from France. Basically, they took, I believe, 2 or 3 Russian POWs, and they put them in like a trench in the position, and they shot them in the back of the head. And they taken, the reason I've seen this video and photographic evidence is because they take this and they post this to a pro-Russian Telegram channel.
In fact, there's been a long-standing affinity between the United States and Ukrainian nationalists. It began immediately after World War II, when the Americans took the fleeing accomplices of Bandera under their wing. In 1948, the CIA launched a secret operation against the USSR. Later, it was given the codename Aerodynamic.
Frank Wisner Sr., who was a CIA officer in charge. He worked with people who had been given him by the U.S. Army Counterintelligence Corps, Stepan Bandera and Mykola Lebed, who were essentially Nazi collaborators and murderers, war criminals, etc. He put together, with their assistance, recruiting and training Ukrainian dissidents to return to the Ukraine or to be taken out of the Ukraine, trained, and then sent back with weapons. And the intent was to divide the Ukraine from the then Soviet Union and make it into an independent country.
The connection between Ukrainian nationalists and terrorists with the CIA could be exposed. This meant war with the Soviet Union. Therefore, the intelligence agencies slightly modified their subversive activities.
They organized something called Prologue, which was a company in New York City that recruited dissidents and neo-Nazis and old Nazis from the Ukraine to make radio broadcasts, print newspapers, and pamphlets and things. In, I think, 1957, they had something like 1,200 hours of radio broadcasts and 100,000 or so newspapers and magazines that they printed and distributed both in the United States and Canada, and also into the Ukraine.
At the same time, in Canada, a secret operation called Red Skid was launched. There is much less information available about it compared to the Aerodynamic. The only known fact is that it also involved Ukrainian nationalists.
They worked with the American intelligence services and with the British to bring a lot of right-wing neo-Nazis or old-time Nazis, people who collaborated with Lebed and Bandera, into Canada and created a tremendous organization called the Ukrainian Conference of Canada.
Today,